speech.
I take Jackie, that's the answer.
So all good. Absolutely love the, the expression, the authenticity and the realness. And I think it's been running throughout the whole day, which I'm loving, and loving that everybody that's been involved has just really felt it properly, genuinely, authentically felt what they're talking about. And yeah, it's all about that. So thank you so much for being part of it. So I'm going to introduce Jackie, who's going to do the last talk of the day, which I'm really excited about, and I hope you are too. So Dr. Jackie Dillon is an activist, author and speaker, and has lectured and published worldwide on trauma, abuse, hearing voices, psychosis, dissociation and healing. She's a key figure in the international hearing voices movement and has co-edited 3 books, published numerous articles and papers, and is on the editorial board of the journal Psychosis. Jackie's survival of childhood abuse and subsequent experiences of using psychiatric services inform her work, and she's an outspoken advocate and campaigner for trauma-informed approaches to madness and distress. Jackie is part of a collective voice demanding radical shift in the way we understand and respond to experiences currently defined as psychiatric illnesses. In 2017, Jackie was awarded an honorary doctorate of psychology by the University of East London. I'm so proud to call Jackie one of my best friends, and it's been great working with you recently on all these wonderful workshops as well. And thank you so much for agreeing to speak today.
Absolute pleasure, my darling. I'm so proud of you. Isn't this amazing, everyone? Look what one woman who gets above herself, a woman who gets above herself, comes up with this magnificent idea, and here we all are, hundreds of us from all over the world, demanding radical revolutionary change and love. So I'm delighted to be here. So here I am today. What I want to focus on talking to you about is something that I think frequently gets neglected in discussions in what we call mental health. I mean, the language is quite impoverished, but is this phenomena which, to my mind, is really common and, yeah, massively neglected, which is iatrogenic harm. So it's a bit of a downer in a way, but I'm going to try and bring it up by the end of my talk. So bear with me, folks, because it's heavy. So what is iatrogenic harm in mental health? Well, so when doctors train, one part of their the tradition that they're meant to uphold comes from this ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, and it is it's a certain set of values that you agree to uphold, including the imperative to do no harm. So following our encounters with traditional psychiatric service, for many of us survivors, both the ideas and the practices of biomedical psychiatry have proven to be really harmful. And one of the things I want to do is try and draw that out a little bit. So if you think about misdiagnoses, I mean, I would argue, and Joe and many of us here would argue, all diagnoses, compulsory treatment, adverse drug reactions, negligence, over-medicalisation, and on and on and on and on, are all relatively common experiences within psychiatric services. So iatrogenic harm is this quite fancy way of referring to injury, either physical or psychological, caused generally inadvertently, although some of us have felt it's been deliberate when we've encountered particularly sadistic or cruel staff in the process of treatment. So what I'd like to explore is what it is, how it's caused, and what can be done about it. So it comes from the Greek, and it literally means brought forth by the healer, and it's any effect from the actions of a healthcare professional. So it's not actually just limited to doctors, it's anyone who's in the role of a healer in the broadest sense of the word, and it has a negative impact on their patients or clients and people that they're working with. So it can be either direct or indirect, and it can be as a consequence of direct treatment or as a consequence of the lack of treatment. So, for example, and this is a common experience for many of us who've been diagnosed, you go to see a healthcare professional. It might be in emergency medicine, and you turn up. For example, you might have a severe cough, and initially the doctor's very interested and listens intently and acts kindly. And then when they look at your medical records and they see that you have a mental health diagnosis, you feel the energy and their attitude shift and change. And suddenly the doctor begins to act differently, growing curt and dismissive, telling you nonsense, like you need to drink more water, or things like you need to lose weight. And in fact, there's a study carried out by a couple of doctors, and they talk about the way that this kind of form of negligence, so not actually giving treatment to people, may result in harm. So that's one form of iatrogenic harm. And in fact, I've known many people who have been sent away from emergency rooms when they're actually in the midst of a serious physical health crisis, like with things like acute pancreatitis, patients that have had cancers missed because people are sort of acting as if this is all in their head. And of course, this is particularly true for women. This is more likely to happen. This comes from Norman Sartorius, who's a very medical doctor, a very medical psychiatrist, former president of the World Psychiatric Association. And this is what he has to say. Psychiatrists and other mental health staff also stigmatise patients in other ways. Until recently, psychiatrists in some European countries, I'm sure it happens in America too, Norman, and elsewhere, were requesting longer holidays and higher salaries than other doctors, because to work with mentally ill patients who are dangerous, while arguing at the same time that mental illness is no different from other illnesses. What a fucking cheek. So actually they want to be paid more. So a lot of this is actually being published in the British Medical Journal. So at least this is a subject that, you know, is being kind of acknowledged, but it's incredibly fragmented and not much out there at all, actually. So I've sort of broken it up into different sort of components of iatrogenic harm. So one of the ways that I think about it is that iatrogenic harm is caused by ideas. So ideas that are dominant in mental health and that are kind of taken as read and not really thought about as being contested ideas. So things like minimizing or ignoring deleterious environments and or collusion with perpetrators. And in my case, that would have meant perpetrators of things like, organized sexual abuse. But for many of us, it also means perpetrators in a more kind of ordinary and more mundane way, perpetrators of social and political injustice, people that uphold unhealthy and inequitable power structures. Ignoring reactions to adversity and abuse and often reframing them as symptoms of mental illness. We see young women in particular being diagnosed with things like borderline personality disorders and, really serious and harmful early experiences being ignored. And of course, this is really true in psychosis. Lots of studies now demonstrating that you're about 53 times more likely to experience something like psychosis if you've had something like 8 types of adversity, but again that being ignored and seen as a symptom of a mental illness. So the harmful effects of psychiatry are especially concerning when looking at the evidence between things like childhood abuse and mental health issues. I'm going to use mental health issues, although I have an issue with it as a kind of descriptor. Additionally, there's evidence that patients who've actually been sexually and physically abused within services, especially in inpatient settings, are often disbelieved, pathologised and silenced. And even in those cases where they are believed, there's very few that are actually given compassionate care and appropriate responses. Again, this is a whole talk in and of itself, but one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating is that the predominance of ideas and practices in services that are out of date. We've got so much better information now about the mind and the body and the ways in which they're kind of intimately and powerfully bound up with each other, and what we have is this kind of Descartesian mind-body separation. So they're just these big heads separated from our bodies. And of course, that isn't the way that trauma and adversity plays out in our minds and bodies. And of course, all of this leads to severe reputational damage, stigma and discrimination, which can be lifelong and impact, aspects of your experience. For me, that's meant, that I've not been believed, that I've had justice denied to me. So people who commit really serious crimes against me have essentially got away with it because of bullshit that's been written in my medical records. For some of us, that means we can't travel abroad, we won't be able to adopt children, we won't be able to drive, we won't be able to apply for certain jobs. So that kind of discrimination is real. It's not just in our heads, of course. There's this particular form of injustice, epistemic injustice, which is based on the idea that we can be unfairly discriminated against in our capacity as knower, based on prejudices about us, based on things like our gender, our sexuality, our background, our ethnicity, our race, and of course our mental health status. So that can play out in a number of different ways. For example, testimonial injustice is unfairness related to trusting someone's word. So an injustice of this kind can occur when someone is ignored or not believed because of their identity. And of course, I'm focusing in particular on people's mental health status. This